You ready? Here we go. Greetings. Welcome. Welcome to the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, both those of you in the hall and the couple hundred people who signed up to watch online. And this will be available online on our website later for forever, I hope. I'm Checker Finn, and we are here to integrate two issues that have been very close and enthusiasms of us at the Fordham Institute for some months now. The one is the Common Core State Standards, which we have become admirers of because we think they are terrific, rigorous, deep, and potentially content-rich academic standards in the two core subjects of language arts and math. And the other issue is I beg your pardon. Turn it off. All right. The other issue is the plight of high ability or gifted students in the United States, especially high ability or gifted students from low income and disadvantaged circumstances. I've come to believe, and our data have come to show, and Jonathan's data have come to show, and everybody else's data have come to show that, especially from disadvantaged circumstances, high ability kids in this country are not faring well. Upper middle class kids with high ability are somehow mostly managing to seize the apple on the tree somewhere. But poor kids of similar ability are getting left behind, and there's all kinds of data suggesting that in the No Child Left Behind era, where we've been concentrating on getting mostly poor kids up to a minimum, we have been neglecting poor kids who are above that minimum. What does that mean in the era of Common Core standards? As states are raising their standards, and every state that is using the Common Core will be raising its standards. A few will be roughly equivalent, but most will be raising their standards. Is the higher standard going to be used as an excuse to do away with the limited array of extra services presently available for high ability students? Or is this manna for gifted students? Is this going to challenge them, require their curriculum to meet their needs, their teachers, etc.? So this could go in any of a number of directions. There's certainly been a lot of anxiety in the gifted education world about what this intersection will bring for high ability students. So we, mystified and unable to find a clear crystal ball about what the future will hold, we engaged Jonathan Plucker, whose crystal ball is transparent, to write a paper full of snow. Actually, never mind. They're flowers in other people's crystal balls. There was a whole feature in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend about those sort of snow globes that now contain preserved flowers in them. Anyway, let's not go there. Jonathan has produced this very interesting paper that we are releasing today and that you should have picked up a copy of on your way in. And he's here to tell us what it says in brief. Then we will engage in conversation with Jonathan, with Rena, and with Tricia, whose biographies are in your material as well. Rena, I've come to know fairly well in the last few years in this realm. She's at the American Psychological Association and an authority in the gifted education space. And Tricia, I only met for the first time today. But she actually gets down and dirty and teaches these kids in a smallish town in northeastern Ohio. And Ohio is also very near and dear to the hearts of those of us at the Fordham Institute. So we are looking for a voice from the trenches, as well as those of us that live in the ivory tower. Without further ado, welcome all. We are available for tweeting too, for those in our worldwide audience. It is at hashtag #CCGifted, hashtag #CCGifted. You can tweet in questions, preferably not just comments, though we're always happy to have praise. And when we get to audience participation, if anybody sends us anything worth asking, we will ask it. Jonathan, take it away. What did you find? What have you concluded? What have you learned?
Well, I don't know if we've learned a ton, but I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'm going to show you a few different slides with data on them. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of flash through them fairly quickly. If you just come up to me afterwards, I'll be happy to give you copies of the slides and things like that. I first want to start by saying it was really exciting to be asked to work on this paper because I can't think of two less controversial issues than gifted education and the Common Core. So it was great to be on the firing line of both of those. And I do want to say that there are very few think tanks that are focused at all on educational excellence, which in this country I think is shocking. So the Fordham Institute deserves a lot of credit for their willingness to really dive into this. So,
Thank you, but keep going.
Keep going. So the data, here we go. I'll show the data very quickly. So on international tests, this is the percentage of advanced scorers in different countries. I included Russia so that we wouldn't be the only low one. Those numbers are, in Taiwan, grade 8 math, essentially 50% score advanced. We generally are between 5 and 6%. These are pictures of state by state on our national NAEP test. We like using TIMS because TIMS and NAEP are actually very similar tests. This is a traditional stoplight color. States that are red are producing very few advanced students, less than 5%. The other one was, this is 2011 data for a very technical reason, is I didn't want to update it for 2013 because it takes like an hour to do. So this is grade 8, which is actually a little better. Not a lot of green, but at least there's more yellow. But yellow is only 6 to 9%. So we see variation within states, internationally to this country, but even states that are doing well, we see very big excellence gaps, as we've come to call them. So this is the difference between students in grade 4 math, NAEP, who score advanced, who qualify for free or reduced price lunch versus non-qualifying. Those percentages are they're both going up, but not nearly at the same rate. So we're actually seeing things widen as things get better for some groups. So that's not bad, that's not good. This is by race, same exact pattern for the most part, except that the lower performing groups are pretty much stagnant. So some groups have done much better, although I would point out that in 1996, even Asian American students were less than 5% scoring advanced. Academic excellence has traditionally not been a focus of American education. Period. I think these data make that case very well. So I just wanted to share that because some of the things that we hear about the Common Core, or for that matter, any major educational reform, are essentially that, oh, this is going to make things better. Well, I think it's important for us to be very transparent about the fact that things have never really been good in this country in terms of advanced performing students. Some groups are starting to do better now, but we're seeing huge gaps develop. So it's not like we were starting from a position of strength before the Common Core came in. So that said, we found plenty of evidence that many districts are using the implementation of the Common Core to cut services for advanced students. I think in the paper we cite 4 or 5 different press releases or interviews. We gave a talk on this topic at a conference in November. To a few hundred teachers. We were overwhelmed by the number of teachers who came up to us afterwards and said, we're having this exact same discussion in my school district. We're getting rid of ability grouping, we're getting rid of AP classes, we're getting rid of X, Y, and Z. And the justification is, well, we have the Common Core now. It's more rigorous. We don't need anything else. That is worrisome, to say the least. That is worrisome. Tom Lovelace, a friend of the Fordham Institute, when I talked to him about this, he called it dog whistle politics. is that so many people with an American education don't want to have to focus on gifted students, advanced learners, academic excellence. So whenever anything comes along that they can use as a sledgehammer to try to go after those services, they hear this imaginary dog whistle that no one else hears, and they immediately go after gifted education. I think that's a pretty apt description of what we've kind of run into here. I've tried to think of a really good metaphor for this, and I keep coming back to speed limits. The fact is, every metaphor I use is so incredibly tortured that everyone goes, yeah, that's great, and no one ever quotes it again. So I'm going to try one more time, because I am obstinate, if nothing else.
It's got to be better than dog whistle.
It has to be, but that was Tom's fault. Actually, I'm not even going to try, because it's going to be tortured. So the Common Core really was meant to be a floor and not a ceiling. And I quote from the Common Core English Language Arts standards themselves. The standards do not define the nature of advanced work for students who meet the standards prior to the end of high school. The standards do not define the intervention methods or the materials necessary to support students who are well above grade level. I can't say it much more plainly than that. Is that the Common Core really is a set of grade level standards. It does not say anything about students who are working above grade level. And that definitely goes for the Common Core assessments that we're seeing spring up around the country now too. 19 or 20 of them, depending on how you count. So will having more rigorous standards in some states help some students, some advanced students? Of course. Are they going to help every advanced student? Of course not. That doesn't make any sense at all. So as I talk to people around the country about this, and I ask them, well, then how do we sort of combat this attitude that, okay, we have the core, worry about advanced students anymore? There was really two sets of recommendations. One is really we have to get better at instructional and curricular differentiation. That is so easy to say because we've been saying it for 30 years. I talked to one state school chief. And apropos of nothing, we were just chatting one day, and he goes, hey, this differentiation thing. So you just know where he's going to go with this. And I said, yeah, what about it? And he goes, I'm in schools every single day. I see almost no differentiation. But when I ask the principal and every teacher, how are you meeting the needs of this group? How are you meeting the needs of that group? They always say, oh, we're differentiating. And he goes, when are you going to start? And that does not go over very well, incidentally. But there's a lot of research now that says that differentiation is incredibly difficult, at least the way that we're currently doing it. We don't teach it very much in teacher prep programs. And we don't do great professional development to help teachers when they're trying to do it, and we don't have great resources to help them do it. Not shockingly, we see very little differentiation. So if you have the Common Core and it's going to work well for students who are well above or well below grade level, there has to be good differentiation. We're just not seeing it. Study after study after study is telling us that now. That's frustrating, but I also think we have to be realistic. I did talk completely off the record to one person who makes a very good living doing differentiation training. And I said, why isn't it working better? You're in the schools literally every single day. And he said, you know what, in all honesty, I think it's way too hard the way we currently have schools set up. There's too much of an ability range within your standard heterogeneously mixed classroom. It's just too difficult, which leads to the second set of things. And these are all policies that I kind of roughly classify as coming from the mindset of education as deficit reduction. That's traditionally been how most state, and certainly federal policy has viewed education. It's about helping those who need the help at the bottom, not necessarily helping people move forward at their own pace. That's a very different philosophical perspective on what education policy is supposed to do. So we see all these policies like rigid kindergarten entry dates, rigid high school graduation requirements that are all there for the right reasons, but they have the unintended consequences of generally not allowing students to move through the public schools at their own pace. every country, every state in this country, every single legislative session fights about where they should move their kindergarten entry date. If you talk to any cognitive scientist, any developmental psychologist, they all say it doesn't matter. It matters about when the child is ready to go in. And yet so much blood will be spilled on moving dates a month forward or a month back. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. The same thing with, what was it, 10 to 15 years ago, roughly, we really tried to improve high school graduation. The data says that it is generally working, but we created these standards. And so if a student leaves early for college, even if they go to Harvard, they may not be able to get a high school diploma because they haven't met the actual credit numbers. Totally an unintended consequence. No one meant for that to happen. And yet we find out that from what we're hearing, a few thousand families a year are really impacted by this. That's a few thousand people who are sitting in high school who could have moved on already. That's not good talent development, and that's not good public policy. Things like ability grouping, you can't say that out loud in most schools right now. I was talking to one middle school principal, and I asked him why his math program was so successful. He said, well, we decided to roughly put students based on the level of instruction that they were ready for. This 5-minute long tortured answer. And I said, oh, ability grouping. And like some of his teachers were in the room, and he super freaked. And he was like, oh my, please don't say that word. Of course, we're not ability grouping. I said, you're just grouping people roughly by their ability. And he said, well, yeah. And I was like, all right, let's move on then. Things like anti-acceleration policies, not letting students move as fast as they can handle. All of these policies, again, have this unintended consequence of making differentiation so much harder for our students. If we keep having this policy environment, differentiation is going to consistently be an ideal and not really a goal for us. And to tie things together here quickly, there are several really good resources to help with differentiation of the core for advanced students. National Association for Gifted Children has 4 books that I think are excellent. They go standard by standard, math, language arts, sample lessons, suggestions for every student in the classroom, not just advanced learners. There's a new book coming out very soon by IAP about working with creatively gifted students too. So as we start this journey, we already have 5 very good resources out there, but we're going to have to change some of these policies if we actually want to see this work for bright students. And I will stop there.
Good work. Thank you very much. Yeah, the differentiation panacea is something that I've been encountering in other countries too. Brandon Wright and I have this book coming out later in the year about how other countries educate their high ability students, and everywhere we go, at least everywhere except Asia, they say, "Oh, we differentiate. We don't need special programs. We don't need anything else. We differentiate." And I want to get to very quickly asking Tricia how it works in the real world. And Rena, what she's learned as she's watched efforts at this, and for how many high ability children it may suffice, and under what circumstances. But what you've really done is lay out a litany of dysfunctional policies that we have grown accustomed to in this country, and some of them, it seems to me, come from federal laws. Some of them, it seems to me, come from state rules, like, when can you start kindergarten, or you have to have 4 credits in English in order to graduate from high school, and stuff like that. And our inability, almost every school I've ever been in, our inability to move kids forward on the basis of performance, of achievement. If they're 11, they belong in 5th grade. I have a 11-year-old granddaughter in 5th grade in a very good private school in New York, and she is bored out of her mind in 5th grade math, at least, and yet the school is sort of unable to do anything about this, even though it's expensive. And the classes are small, and the teachers are knowledgeable, even then. You visit a class of 20 kids, and 3 of them have got the lesson and are staring into space while the teacher works with the other 17, and wondering what's the antidote for this. So there's going to be an increasing amount of activity in this area. Our friends from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation have a very interesting study coming out in a few weeks, about which I can say no more, other than that I think it's very germane to what we're talking about today. And Brandon and I have a book coming out, and Jonathan seems to have something coming out every few weeks. So I think this is going to be a busy topic. Before we get to Tricia and the real world, Rena, you've read the paper. You've been in this field for a long time. What would you like to add or subtract from what Jonathan has written and said?
Okay. I think it's very important for our field to push back on some of the inaccuracies that have been stated about the Common Core. And Jonathan mentioned several of them. I'll say them again, that it's just a starting point. Doesn't define the materials or the instructional strategies, and it's not a logical precursor to cutting gifted education. I want to add a couple of other things, in that if any of you saw the Washington Post yesterday, there was a story that was talking about a majority of people who were polled about the Common Core believed that it was not just about math and language arts, it was about sex education and the American Revolution. And
That's what the revolution was all about, wasn't it?
and it's our responsibility to say, no, this is not what this is about. This is about math standards and language arts standards, and that would help. And that it's a base. It's not, a standard of excellence. The second thing is that I'm hoping is going to happen with gifted education is that, unfortunately, gifted education serves in many communities as the only place where parents can feel they can send their child to a safe and challenging environment. And these are people who, if there were alternatives in regular schools, would send their children there. But gifted education is an oasis in otherwise dysfunctional programs. And that puts a lot of pressure on gifted education to reject children at a rate that's horrifying. So, for example, when I was in Hunter High School, we had not tens, I'm sorry, 3,000 to 4,000 people applying for 200 spots. And if there had been more good middle schools and high schools out there, kids were willing to travel so far to go to the school because there were not good alternatives. So if the standards were higher in other schools, and I would venture to say this was true in many urban communities, there wouldn't be this huge press to be in a gifted program from people who, are bright and motivated, but maybe the gifted program is not the ultimate place for them to be. And finally, I think it is really important for us to demonstrate that gifted programs add value to the kids who participate in them. And one of the ways that you can do that is to have a data system that the Common Core allows for, where if you're having standards in a lot of different communities, there may be able to be more easily to show a data system where people can demonstrate that they're beyond where everyone else is and they have a special need. So those are my 3 comments.
Thanks. The data systems, of course, depend in significant part on the assessment arrangements that are made
Yes.
in terms of student performance. And if you're looking at assessments that sort of top out at what we currently think of as the 99th percentile, it's hard to show growth. And therefore hard to reward kids or teachers or schools for greater gains at the upper end, because the tests don't essentially allow for it to be done. Anyway, what difference, Tricia? I've got lots of things I want to ask you. But first of all, what difference is the Common Core making to you and your work in your school?
It's making a wonderful difference in the work that I'm doing with my students in my school. To give you a little context, I'm teaching at a middle school, and I am the gifted intervention specialist for English language arts for grades 6, 7, and 8. And I am the sole gifted intervention specialist in my building. So the kids who are with me have been identified as having needs and as gifted children, and it is through my language arts class that those needs are met. And I have my kids for 3 years. So they come to me in 6th grade, and unless something happens like a move or something like that, they're with me for 3 years, which is unique. I know that.
In a 3-year combination classroom or in 3 separate classrooms?
3 separate classes,
Okay,
but I have them for 3 years.
And do you have them all? Are you their only English language arts teacher?
I am their only.
So it's a full-time pullout for those kids.
For language arts.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. For language arts. Full-time language arts pullout program. Okay, keep going.
Okay. So what I've seen as I've worked within my class and with my students over the past few years as I've worked on these transitions is some really amazing things. Sometimes I've actually questioned myself as to, did I really push them as hard as I thought I was 6, 7, 8 years ago? Because they're coming up with some amazing things. For example, last fall, we were working on a study of the journeys to the North and the South Pole. And we were kind of integrating some social studies in with English language arts, reading fiction, reading nonfiction. And I don't know how we got on a tangent, but my 7th grade class got onto this tangent, asking all kinds of questions about how the Holocaust could ever have happened. How could that be? How could anyone let this happen? How could people not stand up for people who are being persecuted by their government? And they did not understand that at all. So I took that 20-minute tangent. I did manage to steer them back to the South Pole with a little bit of difficulty.
Goodness.
But we just finished a 5-week study on the precursors to the Holocaust. We didn't go into the really ugly aspects of the Holocaust. They're 7th graders. Okay, that's something that if they want to research more and learn more about when they're a little bit older, some of those really difficult aspects, that would be a more appropriate time. But they now have an understanding, and they now can see, okay, this is what led up to this, and that it wasn't just some random person one day saying, here's what we're going to do. There was a whole host of factors, and through that I could integrate fiction, I could integrate nonfiction. They were reading articles. There was a wonderful story. I'm not going to remember the originating newspaper, but there's a website called News ELA, and they had an article about a gentleman whose family owned a chocolate factory in Poland. And they escaped, and eventually he lived in the United States, and what he now does to teach children about the Holocaust. And my kids were taking a look at his story. And so what I'm finding with the Common Core standards is I don't have to follow any one particular set of materials to meet the standards. I get to choose.
So, well, I want to interrupt because you haven't yet quite indicated how you're integrating the standards with the lessons. You get to choose your materials, but are the standards underlying the South Pole, so to speak?
Well, in a sense. I mean, basically, I can take those standards, and if we want to look at the South Pole, I can say, okay, here is some informational text that's dealing with the South Pole, and we can look at informational text as being websites. National Geographic has some great things. That's informational text. Just because it's on a computer screen doesn't mean it doesn't count. It does count. We can look at video. We read to get a sense of what 70 degrees below zero feels like, because this was before this winter hit. We could read To Build a Fire by Jack London, which is fiction, but they got a sense of what that experience was like. And we could integrate, okay, here's a character and how the setting and the character are interacting, and that creates the conflict for the story, going right into those reading literature standards. And then take a look at what happened in Antarctica, and how did those real people who really lived and experienced that trip to the South Pole, how did those temperatures impact them? Do we see similarities? Was London accurate or not?
So how is this different from what you were doing before the Common Core came along? If at all?
It is somewhat different. First of all, before we were fully transitioned into the standards in my school, we taught reading and writing as 2 separate classes. And so while I had my students in 6th grade for reading class one part of the day, and then their writing class later in the day, my 7th and 8th graders I had only for writing. And until we started transitioning into the Common Core standards, in my writing classes, I really tried to avoid the reading that I knew my colleagues who were their reading teachers were doing. It was getting really, really difficult the more I transitioned because so much of our writing is based in what we're reading.
So wait, you're saying, if I'm hearing this right, that the Common Core actually led to a restructuring of how your school is organized?
Yes.
Because of the Common Core? Because somebody said these need to be joined?
We had been talking about joining them for several years. I mean, several of us were beginning to really feel like we were isolating two very tightly related things too much.
Right.
But I think Common Core kind of nudged it together.
So do you, when you're teaching a 7th grade gifted class ELA in the Common Core era, and you're planning a lesson, do you look at the standards to see which standards your lesson relates to, or do you just sort of take for granted that if you do a good job, the standards will be covered?
No. I always look at the standards. And I've got a placemat. This is going to sound kind of hokey. I have a placemat where I keep track of have I really hit the standards that I need to be hitting at the time I need to hit them? What ones haven't I addressed as thoroughly? What still needs attention? Because it's like anything else. We have our favorites. And so I have to make sure that I'm not leaving certain pieces out because I favor certain others. So I am always looking at the standards and integrating the standards. That's always the foundation for what I'm doing, but it's the foundation. It's not the ceiling.
Is anybody checking on you, or are you self-motivated to look at the standards as you plan your lessons?
Well, I don't know that anyone's formally checking on me. Certainly in my teacher evaluations, my administrators are checking to see that I have documented which standards I'm addressing in the lessons they're observing. And then we have collaboration time. So my colleagues and I are sharing what it is that we're doing in our department meetings and basing that as well. We're taking a look at what standards we are working with.
Let me ask a sort of structural question. How big is your school?
We have about 850 to 900 students.
And it's grade 6, 7, 8 only?
Grade 6, 7, 8 only.
Okay, and I know under Ohio law, kids have to be identified as gifted.
Yes.
And statewide, I know, because I looked it up, about 15% of the kids in the state are identified as gifted. How does this play out in your school?
We run, I don't know, we're at 15%. We're easily around 10%.
Easily around 10%. Mm-hmm. And then are they all given the option of your classes, or how does it get decided who's in your class and who's not?
We might be at 15%.
Okay.
Not every identified student receives services through me. Students who receive services through my classes have to be identified in English, language arts, and math as specific academic or superior cognitive identification.
Say it again, superior?
Superior cognitive.
Okay, those are two different
either
things. Subject identification or what we used to call IQ identification.
Yes.
Okay. So then they qualify to come into your class, what, if they want to?
Kind of. I mean, can they say, no, I don't want to be there? Yeah, they can. That doesn't tend to happen very often.
Do the same kids also get, or another group of kids, gifted separate class in math?
We don't have specific formal classes for gifted in math. We do have honors math classes in grades 6, 7, and then in 8, they can take honors algebra 1, which is a high school credit course. Oh. They get a credit-bearing course in 8th grade.
Whoa, okay. And that's integrated with how the high school works?
Yes.
Okay. So does this sound atypical to you?
Yes. Not to beat this point to death, but there are things in your school that are some of those policy limitations that we were talking about that cause problems around the country that you don't have. So your school is very forward-thinking in that way. I am really surprised that you're doing it in English and language arts, but not the same thing in math. I mean, you're doing other things in math, which I think are very valuable. But it's usually the exact opposite. For some reason, you can say the G word grouping with math much more than you can do it with English with English language arts for some reason. And your school's doing it the other way around. Which do you have a thought about why that is? That is very rare.
There's a structural thing within my district that leads to that. In grades 4 and 5, kids are served in language arts and math. And then when they gifted kids are. And when they get to the middle school, I'm only one. And we haven't figured out cloning yet, I guess. So therefore, it's the English language arts piece that we carry on, and then they have the honors math.
If we let more kids do math like that, we'll figure out cloning a lot faster.
This is both good and bad.
Right.
I'm not sure that everyone would want me to be cloned.
So, Rena, just on the basis of the little bit you've heard about Trisha's school, are they making good headway in solving the problems that we've been talking about?
I would say yes. I'm a proponent of looking at giftedness as a domain-specific approach. So you gifted in something as opposed to kind of global giftedness. And so if we're attending to the fact that kids might be talented and have proclivities in language arts and or mathematics, we're dealing with them separately here as opposed to assuming that if you're very good at one age on an IQ test that you will always be good in those school subjects.
Okay. By the way, there's seats up front for you folks if you would like chairs. They're all over the place, just scattered. The Ohio's, I mean, you're obviously not in charge of Ohio's definitional structure for gifted education. And it includes, if I'm hearing this correctly, the domain specific and also the sort of IQ based. Yes.
Yes.
Do you know, just parenthetically, how many of the kids coming into your class were identified which way? Or don't they bother to make
No,
that?
I can look that up. Would I know off the top of my head?
All
Can I
right.
give you percentages
All right.
right now? No,
All right.
I can't.
Not important. So you have a school that differentiates by moving kids into a full-out program for high-ability English language arts students. Do you further differentiate in your classroom?
Yes, I do.
How?
It depends on what we're working with, but one of my go-tos is with grammar, which I don't teach in isolation very often, but there are some things, like I've told the kids, some of it's learning the vocabulary, like parts of speech. So what I do with that is usually some kind of pretest, and the kids who have it, great, and they have some alternative things they can work on. And the kids who need a little bit of practice with it, then I have contracts for them that basically here are the certain things that they need to work on. And it's not just with grammar, but that tends to be kind of an example a lot of people can easily understand. So that's one way that I'll differentiate. I have done some differentiation this year, even with the difficulty of text, and putting my students into groups based on how strong their reading skills are. And keep in mind, it can be a relative term, but I can give certain students a more challenging text and other students a not quite as challenging text. And sometimes that leads to some very good discussions because they're reading two slightly different things. And it's still on the same theme or the same topic, but we have some good discussions with that. And that News ELA site is really a nice one for that because that one can adjust the article levels on reading difficulty as well. So that's one that I've used in that way.
Is that site? I don't remember. Was that one of the sources you mentioned in the paper, or is this something we should?
Oh, that's new. Yeah, that's definitely something we should share.
Okay, worth knowing about. So your kids, like everybody in Ohio and most of the country, are going to be taking new assessments next week. I mean, real soon in ELA and math. And let's first talk about the old assessments. Were your kids in these gifted classes well served by the assessments that Ohio has been using?
Not especially.
Okay, elaborate, please.
I'd have kids hitting the ceiling on the tests, just plain and simple. For example, I had a student who, just a wonderful young man, who hit the 99th percentile 2 years in a row on our reading assessment, which I thought was phenomenal because statistically, how difficult is that? And the state, of course, because of the way things were looking, they were looking at that. They're like, well, that's nice. He didn't show more than a year's growth. And I'm thinking, well, how could he? So the other piece of it was the data that I would get back didn't always really help me a whole lot as their teacher. It would give me, okay, they were at this to do with vocabulary, this to do with informational text, this to do with literary text, but what about those things was the challenge. So I'm really hopeful that our new assessments are going to give me better data that will help me.
Have you gotten enough information about them? I'm not sure I have, for example, to have a feeling for whether this is going to be the case or not? the new park test in Ohio's case?
I'm pretty excited about it because I see the kinds of questions that the kids are going to be asked and the kinds of things they're going to have to do. And it's the kind of thing that I have wanted them to do, and I've tried to get kids to do for years, even before Common Core. What's your proof? How do you know that that's the case? Show me where in the story or where in the poem or where in that article that information comes from. So that text evidence piece, I think is really, really cool. And for what I know about how the assessments are put together, I am not sure what score reports will look like, but I'm hopeful we're going to get some really good data from that. And I'm also hopeful there's a lot of stretch, so my kids will not be limited as they have been in the past.
So I'm about to betray my psychometric ignorance and hope that either Rena or Jonathan can improve upon it. My impression has always been that unless you have an adaptive test like the Smarter Balance people claim they are creating, that in order to really show growth at the high end, you would have to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of items on your test, and it would take a very long time to administer. Am I right about that?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I've heard from people in Louisiana that there's just not a will to add additional items to meet this need. So it is a problem.
So if you have let's say 100-item test and 80 of the items are geared toward, roughly speaking, the middle, you're not going to show very much change either at the high end or at the low end, frankly, for that matter, because you don't have items that are appropriate to the kids. If you had a 1,000-item test, presumably it would be different, but it would then take 4 years to administer. The adaptive, which is, at least in concept, a really good idea. I've also heard, and I don't know, I'm going to get beyond my federal policy depth here, is constrained by federal law into how adaptive it can be. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding.
And that it can only go like A grade level above the grade that it's being administered to?
You're right, which really doesn't make the assessment any more sensitive than what we're currently using. It's non-adaptive. So, but I mean, at the same time, creating an adaptive test, getting that framework in, having it become part of the culture, that's the hard part that we've never been able to actually accomplish before. Let's get that in place. I mean, I wish it was 5 grade levels in each direction. That's not going to happen. But 1, I'll take it because now we have the framework that we can expand it later. We can change the federal policy. We can change the practice. So it's a good start, but there's no question that it really is just the starting line.
But technically and psychometrically, it could go 5 grade levels above. It's tell me if I'm wrong. It's the law that says we want grade level testing that keeps it from actually being created that way.
That is my understanding.
Technically, it could go way up.
Have a norming sample. I mean, it is complicated.
All right.
I mean, to me, it's part of it would be one simple thing to do. I remember Sally Reese blew people away. Sally Reese from the University of Connecticut talked about taking her 4th grade students and giving them the end of the year exam on the first day of school, and 80% of them passed it. And so it's kind of, well, now what do I do with them? I mean, that's one mechanism that we could work on as a community, is try to find simple ways that teachers can demonstrate that students have already mastered material and bring it to the administrator and say, I can, this is so far beyond what I have in my class to offer that I need to either accelerate them or we have to have a special class or something, or find a mentor. And I think we could contribute to that by providing simple ways for teachers to demonstrate that are valid and reliable.
You on the verge of saying something?
Yeah, I played devil's advocate a little bit, and Rena's point made me think about this. I mean, I am generally optimistic that we're heading in the right direction with this. There's an immense amount of work that has to be done. But in the back of my mind, as we're talking about, I have better data, I mean, there really is the old problem of you can bring a horse to water. So, a very quick anecdote. When I was in elementary school teacher, we had a parent come in the day before school started, which you never actually want parents show up in your classroom before the school year actually started. And she said, my son is entering 5th grade, but he's actually come from a school that was accelerated. He's already had 6th grade math. I said, all right, let's go talk to his teacher. Let's go talk to his math teacher. Let's go talk to the principal. World War III erupted. And so the compromise was, let's give him the end of year 5th grade exam on the first day of 5th grade, and let's give him the end of the first unit 6th grade test. He got a 95% on the 6th grade test, and he got like an 85% on the 5th grade test. And I thought, all right, we just need to fill in a few gaps, but for the most part, actually, he could probably be in 7th grade math. The 5th grade teacher's conclusion after all these data were, see, he doesn't know 15% of what I'm going to teach him. He needs to be in here every single day. This is like the early 90s. If you heard like an explosion sound, it was the head of this mother popping off her shoulders. She was apoplectic. She got so upset. And so the compromise was, and I argued this may not be sound.
4th grade.
It was pretty darn close. 4 days a week, he was in 6th grade math.
Oh.
Fridays, he was in 5th grade math. And when I said, so are you telling me that you know your curriculum well enough that that's when the 15% is going to be taught? That's insane.
Only on Fridays.
Right, and it would be 20% because it's 1 out of 5. But it was just a math class. So that has always stayed with me. Part of this is very much philosophical in that a lot of Americans, not educators, a lot of Americans believe that social justice means everyone gets the same thing, they're taught the same way at the same time. I don't think that's really what equity is, but that is a very pervasive bias in many of our schools, in our society in general, and I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind. Even if every policy were perfect, even if differentiation was happening perfectly everywhere, even if the tests were absolutely what we all wanted, we would still have this bias that we're running into.
I'm going to pick right up on that with 2 last questions from me for Tricia, and then I want to open this up. Secretary Page, welcome. And we will open it up both to those of you in the room and those of you on the worldwide electronic audience. Once again, a reminder that you can hashtag us at hashtag #CCGifted. Can your kids accelerate if they're finished with 6th grade math? Can you put them in the 7th grade class, or do they have to stay in 6th grade? I mean, English language arts, not math.
With English language arts, we haven't really done that yet, not at least in title. But let me give you an example. This just in the last 3 weeks, my 6th graders have been writing argumentative essays. One of the things that I'm requiring them to do is address the counterclaim. That's not something that is in the standards until I think 7th grade is acknowledge and 8th grade is address. So even though we're not accelerating them in name on the report card, I am able to pull in things from the standards at the upper, in the next grades up and do that. And part of the luxury I have is I have them for 3 years. So I know I can do that with them in 6th grade and where I
you'll have them again in 7th grade.
Right.
But the district does not accelerate in general, or?
No, we do. I have 2 8th graders that are taking high school geometry.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say it's a common occurrence, but it is certainly not something that is foreign to us either.
Last question for the moment. How does your district deal, if it's an issue at all, with the elitism allegation that you are there to cater to the already privileged and elites who will do fine anyway?
I honestly don't know if we've run into that. I guess maybe if we do, my administrators handle that, and I don't hear much of that. We have our kids are identified based on the criteria set forth by the state. So the look in my classroom is to look very much like the rest of my school. It's not like my classroom looks different in any kind of socioeconomic way or any kind of ethnic way. Mm-hmm. We're not a terribly diverse district. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest about that. But I've got kids that are on free and reduced lunch. I've got kids who aren't. I've got the gamut going within my classroom as well. So I don't know that we hear a lot about elitism.
So when you go to, sorry, I said I wouldn't ask any more questions, but I can't help myself. When you go to meetings around Ohio of gifted, talented educators, are they panicked about the Common Core, or are they seeing it as an opportunity the way you are?
I think it depends on the person.
Of course.
To me, this has been a journey. I think it's a process, it's a growth process. And so I think it just depends on where they started with their transition into Common Core. Some started earlier than others. Our state association, our Ohio Association for Gifted Children, 5 years ago, had Tamara Stambaugh in from the College of William and Mary Center for, I'm just losing the name now.
Gifted education.
Center for Gifted Education. I was going to say talented and gifted. I'm going to get that all wrong. Anyway, she came into our I think it was the spring conference, and it was a phenomenal, eye-opening conference for everyone who was there in terms of, she was taking a look at, here's where the current standards are, here's where the new standards are, here's where we need to be going with our gifted kids. Don't sit back and assume that, because we have these new standards, that's good enough, because that's not. It's not fair to gifted kids to say these standards are good enough. And she was exactly right. And I think that's been huge for helping us along that path.
So you're not hearing people panicking that this is going to mean the end of gifted education in my district?
I have not heard that.
Okay. Back to you, Jonathan. One more. The Common Core standards themselves, if you parse the language, include various sort of ex cathedra assertions, including the one that you quoted, that these are meant to be not meant to deal with above grade level students. There's another ex cathedra assertion that my friends at the Core Knowledge Foundation quote frequently, which says these standards must be accompanied by a content-rich curriculum. The fact of the matter, however, is that the standards themselves are not a content-rich curriculum, and the standards themselves are not speaking to above grade level students. They're saying, in effect, somebody else should do this in association with the Common Core. And I'm not sure whether that is being taken up, whether people are implementing with an eye toward these admonitions in the standards that somebody should. Do you have any feel for that? Do you have any feel for that?
I don't think most people make that distinction between the two. I think the NAGC resources that they're publishing do actually, where they hang very rich content off of these standards to really help teachers differentiate. But I think most people would miss that point.
I agree.
Yeah.
You agree? All right. On that slightly glum note, the floor is open. Let's see hands. There are mics. The mics will come to you. We're being recorded or broadcast or something or other. So bring Ann Bryant a mic. And I'm not going to know everybody's name. So even though I said your name, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Ann Bryant, formerly with the National School Boards Association. Tricia, have you had a chance to look at and work with your colleagues who are not teaching gifted and talented, and has their teaching changed, and to what extent?
Yes. I am in department meetings with my grade levels every week, twice a week with 2 of the grade levels. The 3rd grade level, because of my schedule, I can't meet with them as regularly. Our teaching overall as a building is changing. Part of it is the fact that we're reintegrating the writing and the reading classes into a single course. But it's interesting. We were talking about this at lunch last week one day, some of my 7th grade colleagues and I, and one of them said she really likes the depth that we can get into literature and nonfiction now. Things that we used to feel pressure to cover literature and not necessarily go deep with it. So we can do more with less, if you will. And so my colleagues are seeing that too. That's been neat.
Good. Others in the room, or yes, in the back, Caprice.
So,
Mike, introduce yourself.
I'm Caprice Young. I work with charter schools and traditional public schools, mostly in Los Angeles.
And is on the board of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute.
And
Thank you.
yes, and that too. The schools that I'm working with right now are struggling because in Los Angeles there are 5,000 middle school students that are identified highly gifted and high achieving, and the school district has just come down with a policy that says that no middle schools are allowed to teach algebra anymore even though we
God.
have sixth and seventh graders who are ready for algebra, and also that charters that deliver petitions to them as their authorizer will be considered not likely to be successful, because if they use a curriculum that they would determine as non-Common Core or too difficult, they see that as not likely to be successful, and therefore under the charter school criteria in the state, a cause for turning down a charter. But it sounds like your school district figured it out and is allowing the kids to get algebra, geometry, and maybe even in some cases algebra 2 credit in middle school. How did you convince them to do that?
Before you answer, this is a district policy in Los Angeles or a CDE policy?
It's a Los Angeles Unified School District policy.
And it says you may not teach algebra?
Yeah, you may not teach algebra, geometry, or algebra 2 in middle school because they're supposed to take that in high school. And it's written now into the teachers union contract because they don't want to teach it in the middle schools. And they're also enforcing it onto the charters because charters have to pass a test in their authorizing process that says that your curriculum is materially likely to be successful with the kids. And even charters that have been doing algebra and geometry in middle school are now being told that they will not be renewed.
So
Is this part of the reaction to Algebra for All in the 8th grade in California?
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. They've been fighting algebra in 8th grade for 10 years now.
I'm going to speculate that it's also part of the pushback against the Common Core, because a lot of the critics who would like the Common Core to go away have been saying, but under the Common Core, you can't teach algebra in 8th grade. And I believe California's, I thought, had a state law saying you must teach algebra in 8th grade.
Yes.
It's what?
Yes.
Yes. So is this not an example of what you were talking about at the beginning, Jonathan? Sort of the kind of rumor mongering and misbehavior in the name of the Common Core?
Yeah, I mean, we hear stories like this all the time. None as frightening and nightmare-inducing as that one, but that really is apocalyptically stupid. I mean, I can't. Probably shouldn't have said that on the internet.
No, we're glad you did.
I'm going to get a lot of angry
This is
emails.
the Gadfly organization.
I mean, that is unbelievable to me, and yet we do hear slightly lesser versions of that constantly, and they do blame the Common Core. Well, the Common Core says. No, the Common Core does not. It does not say that, period. There are parts of the Common Core that I wish were different, but it is getting kind of old that we keep blaming the Common Core for everything. It's become this all-purpose boogeyman. And I mean, we wouldn't. I mean, you're essentially saying you can only have so much excellence in middle school, especially if you're a certain group of kids in a certain group of schools in a certain city. I mean, you talk about where's the social justice in that? I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Very frustrating.
It came from a really romantic view that everyone should take algebra in the 8th grade, which was a mistake. And it took all those years to discover it was, a really serious mistake, not for every child. For some people, they really benefited from it, but there were many who were faced with failure over and over again. And so we really have a challenge here of, something that would be good for gifted kids is not necessarily good for everyone. And yet there's also the mantra, well, gifted education is good education, and everyone should be learning from gifted education. So it's really, we're caught in a box.
So I think you're also saying that in our typical pendulum fashion, having maybe gone too far in one direction, we are now overreacting and going too far in the opposite direction.
Yes.
So back to the original question from Caprice. Can you remark at all, Tricia, on how your district has avoided this kind of a problem?
I think our district has really embraced the idea that we want kids learning and growing. There have been discussions with our staff that administrators have said, hey, it's great that we've done all this wonderful stuff with the bottom quintile of our students on our scores. But what are we doing with the top 2 quintiles? What are we doing to push those kids forward? And so that's really become kind of an encouragement. Our administrators are not trying to use that as a hammer with the staff. It's really more of a what can we do to move everyone forward. So it's really an organizational, cultural piece.
You don't mean you want all kids learning and growing? Why would a school want that? Are you available to move to Los Angeles? Caprice, I think, could find a job for you. Combating I think, dumb policy, but also the state is not blameless in this regard in the opposite direction either, and neither is the gifted education field. Let me combat your anecdote with another California anecdote, because I was talking to a pretty influential California state level policymaker not too long ago about why did gifted education disappear from the California budget. And he said, because the people in gifted education could never tell us who was eligible. It was so nebulous. Once we called it gifted and talented education, and people were saying everybody qualifies because everybody's talented in some way. And we had this little state appropriation that was potentially spread across the entirety of the state. Nobody could see what good it was doing, and it was never focused on anything in particular. And so when we decided to block grant some of our categorical programs in California a few years ago, of course we rolled that into the block grant. And so now if you go to the OCR website, and actually look for the data by district in California, you will find some major districts. I think San Jose was my example, because I looked at a few of them myself. Some major districts reporting that nobody is being given gifted and talented services in the whole big urban district, because there's no longer a state categorical program for it, so they're not doing it. Anyway, more questions? Yes, gentleman in the plaid shirt. Microphone is coming. Who are you?
Matthew Reeve, Director of Advanced Enriched Instruction for the District of Columbia Public Schools,
Welcome.
Which I've brought some of my team members here from our office.
Good.
And so what I would say is that although in the District of Columbia we do not have municipal regulations that identify gifted and talented students, and we don't want to, what we have noticed is that during the past few years, we have adopted the Common Core state standards, and I think we've had the luxury of being able to be in a jurisdiction where there has not been pushback against the Common Core. It's been pretty well accepted in terms of politics. And so what we've noticed over these past few years, and this will be the first year that we do park assessments, what we've noticed is that it actually has allowed a more rigorous curriculum to be developed than had been previously done. Our previous curriculum had been, when we had a curriculum, had been thrown out for a few years. It was very fragmented into different skills, strategies, whereas this one's much more, like you were mentioning, much deeper. However, what we've recognized is that it still leaves the need to differentiate. It really is still just a floor, although it's a much higher floor than it had been before. But it certainly hasn't prevented us from continuing to provide the differentiation services that our students need, including algebra in our middle grades, and in some cases at certain schools like our premier middle school, which is called Deal Middle School here in DC, they do offer geometry in middle school for high school credits.
So keep the mic for just a second. If the district does not identify kids as gifted and talented, on whose shoulders is the responsibility for serving high ability learners?
So we've basically, what we have done is made it so that the schools individually can decide based on our state level assessments, what we like to call state level assessments, and the school's individual criteria, who would best benefit from our different ability groupings within classrooms. Although we also have different math pathways, etc. The role of our district, such as myself, is to provide the professional development and to spend the resources. So one thing we've noticed, particularly is with teachers not differentiating, a lot of the time it's not that they don't want to, because it is hard, but that they don't have the resources that they need. And so our main job has been to provide them with those resources, curricular supplements, etc. But we do leave it up to the schools. And that has led to a system where certain schools do a better job at differentiating than others. One thing that's definitely helped us is that DC got a waiver from No Child Left Behind not that long ago that actually does credit our schools if they do have students that rise above proficient into the advanced category, which helps the school's individual No Child Left Behind ranking so that they can be what we call a quote reward school, which has helped make our school leaders, individual school leaders, want to pay more attention to these students, something that during the traditional No Child Left Behind period, we weren't seeing. And that is when DC actually lost its traditional gifted and talented program, because we did used to have one, 10, 15 years ago.
Any reactions from anybody up here to that, or comments that you want to offer? It's a very interesting additional local more than anecdote, portrait of how this district is working. I have myself all over the place encountered the "we leave it up to the schools to decide" response on gifted education. And it is invariably accompanied by what you said, which is that some schools do it better than others. Leading, of course, the question, is there any accountability mechanism whereby it even gets noticed whether a school is doing it well or not? Ohio now reports on the school's state report card, right? How it's doing with growth for gifted students?
Yes.
Yes? Do you have anything that resembles an accountability mechanism in DC whereby you know and or can ding or reward the school depending on how it's doing?
Well, again, I would say again, the closest comparison I would say is that now we are looking at growth of students into the advanced category, and so schools have been rewarded for being able to move more of those kids up. Whereas before, we did definitely have that ceiling effect of if once you're proficient, it doesn't matter how many more kids you get above that level. But as far as what you're mentioning specifically with Ohio, no.
Something like a report card that includes this item on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There needs to be a collection of all the places that do this that actually have a viable growth model option for the states to use. Because I think right now, most people say, well, we just don't know how to do it, or we can't do it. But clearly, at least we have two examples right here in the room. And that would be enormously helpful.
Yes, it would. Others in the room with a yes, ma'am. Something has been tweeted to us, so we'll compare your question with this one. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Beverly Jurenko. I'm with Fairfax County Association for the Gifted, and I'm pursuing a PhD in education policy. We talked about computer adaptive testing, but we haven't talked about computer adaptive learning and flexible testing. Could you see us evolving to a world where we have flexible testing dates on the Common Core so that advanced students could demonstrate mastery of the material and advance to the next level without having the impact of having everybody take the test at the same time at the end of the year when they've already mastered the material?
Certainly, if the kid stays home, he can do that through the Khan Academy. What you just said, but I don't know about schools. Comments? Any of you?
I mean, I think that's kind of the goal that lots of my colleagues have, and you actually raise a broader point here, which is that whenever I hear people say that they're against grouping, my immediate question to them is, including the arbitrary age-based grouping that you're almost certainly doing. They usually don't laugh when I say that. It was a very frosty conversation, and
you must have a lot of those.
I do. Probably not as many as you, Checker, but I do have a lot. But how do we get away from that? And we get away from that from using the technology that we already have to help individualize. I think doing it on a large scale within our public schools is going to be very resource intensive to make that switch. But I mean, so much of what we do with these things now is so individualized. Why aren't we seeing more of it in learning? Rick Hess had a blog post yesterday or today about this very, very topic, I think. So I think that's the goal. I think we're going to get there faster than people realize. My concern is that the have districts are going to have it much sooner than the have-nots. And I think the have-nots, quite frankly, need it sooner. So,
one other idea that I don't know why it's not been picked up more. It was by Robert Slavin, who's at Johns Hopkins and not necessarily a big fan of gifted education. Well, he was not an enemy,
Success for all.
Success for all. Promoted what he called the Joplin Plan, whereby math would be taught at the same time throughout the school. So if you had Susie in grade 2 who could do fourth grade math, she would go to the fourth grade classroom for math and not be disruptive to the rest of her day or to the teacher. So, particularly in math, if you had it set up, and I've seen this done at a private school in New York, which was a K-12 school, that they could do it with fourth graders going to eighth grade or to ninth grade, because math was always taught at a certain time of day. And I think sometimes we let scheduling, become too much of a problem, and people, I couldn't possibly do that. Well, it seems like an easier answer than a lot of the other answers we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback off that too. Or these tests, while they're important, they're one snapshot. So I would hate to think that single snapshot would keep a child who should be accelerated and is showing that in every other way from being accelerated. It doesn't mean that states or districts are going to have to try to figure out how to negotiate that in terms of whatever data might be required or that kind of thing. But I know I would advocate if I've got a child who needs to be accelerated and what I'm told is, well, but they haven't taken that grade level test yet. Well, but every other indicator's there. So why don't we go ahead and do it? We'll figure out that testing piece.
I'm going to read the tweeted question, and then we'll get to you. From Ann Flick. With scores predicted to drop on the new tests, will release in November, she's predicting, of lower scores by gifted students add to the calls to drop gifted classes. Will lower scores by gifted kids on the new tests further worsen the problem of gifted education? Anybody want to put on their predictor hat for this one? Go ahead.
And this is not going to be very popular, but
That's all right. We're all used to that here.
I think gifted students, if they're gifted in this, identified to be in a gifted program for math or language arts, should be doing very well on those tests. And it just does drive me crazy that unless there's some kind of serious problem, why gifted students should not be achieving and performing highly. And the problem with identifying students in pre-K and then it's impossible for them to leave the program is that many of them are not performing after a while, and there's no will to say, well, maybe you should be in another class for a while until you can come back, and maybe somebody who's blossomed later could have that slot. It's very painful, but giftedness is not a permanent condition. And, it's something you have to develop. So
And you might not keep it, is what you're saying.
You may not keep it.
It's not like being left-handed, or
right.
Okay. Okay. Any thoughts about the test score effect that may come?
I am happy to let Rena be quoted on that.
Okay.
I do not generally disagree.
Okay. Take the mic to the lady in the second row on the aisle. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Jane Clarenbach. I'm with the National Association for
Hold
Gifted...
it closer. We're not quite hearing you, I think. Try it again.
I'm Jane Clarenbach. I'm with the National Association for Gifted Children. And part of what I wanted to say, I had a question before and I was going to let it go. And then Rena brought up the Joplin Plan. And I'd like to just say that following on Jonathan and all the policy problems, truly the accountability mechanism and No Child Left Behind is at the core of all of the problems that we have. Students, matching the student and the grade and the curriculum and then the assessment for accountability purposes is one of the major obstacles for doing the right thing for bright kids. So the second grader who's doing fourth grade math, which exam is she going to take? And depending on your state negotiated arrangement with the US Department of Ed, she's probably taking the second grade test because she's a second grader enrolled in the second grade. If she's taking fourth grade math, the school doesn't want her to take the fourth grade exam. They want her to take the second grade one, except that she's not doing the curriculum for the second grade. So you see the conundrum already. We haven't matched for bright kids curriculum and the assessment for accountability purposes. And schools are motivated to do the wrong thing because of the consequences of the exams. I don't know that Congress can fix that. I suppose if we turn it all back to 50 states, a few of those 50 states might fix it. In the next iteration of ESEA, but it seems highly unlikely because, as Jonathan says, we don't have a good tradition of doing the right thing for excellence.
Do you have a fix in mind?
I think we have to provide flexibility that one child could be taking both a second grade English language arts exam and a sixth grade math exam for accountability purposes. And of course, that means you have to flag children differently in the data systems. But my goodness, as Jonathan holds up his cell phone, we surely have the capacity to do this if we wanted to do it.
And the girl who's taking sixth grade math, who's a second grader, we wouldn't expect her to top that off. I mean, she should be growing in that area. That she would be at the point where she could grow, and that's what would be exciting.
I mean, I do think that, I mean, if I could pick one thing for us to do to help start addressing some of these problems, it would be the accountability system issue. And
you agree with Jane about that? That's
yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, I do believe we generally have a good public school system. It's not uniform by any means. We all know that. But I do think that if we knew that schools and teachers felt that they were being held accountable for the growth, the education, or just the appearance of educational excellence, that they would create the market for we need this, we need this, we need this. I really do think that would be a game changer. We do have some states, Ohio, New Mexico, DC we heard about just now, that are tinkering with this. And we need to study them very carefully to see what the downstream effects are. But I actually think that this great American experiment with different states trying different things is actually starting to show that you can get students up to proficiency and also promote educational excellence. Is it going to work? We actually need to study it and find out. But I do think there's room for optimism there. And I think that's going to be a lot easier than going school by school, which is what we're trying to do now.
So I'm known around here as Mr. Glass Half Empty. I'm watching too many states tinker with it and not get it right. Ohio, for example, requires that kids be identified as gifted, but it has no requirement that kids be served, even after they've been identified. So according to the data I've seen, only about 1 in 5 of the kids in Ohio who've been identified as gifted are actually served by anything resembling gifted education. And what qualifies as gifted education is incredibly varied. Might be this full-time ELA class for 3 years that you're describing, but it might be a half an hour a day or a week even of something else, something very different. DC, I think the team here is honorably trying to make the best of a situation in which, in fact, the schools are not rated or accountable for how well they're handling this, though they're free to do so. And I believe in school-level responsibility and authority. But what's the metric by which we know whether they're doing it well? So I don't know. I'm not for the federal government mucking around here too much, but I'm not quite sure any level of government has got this quite right anywhere that I'm seeing. Rena.
One other area,
cheer us up. Cheer me up.
One other area that I think it's important to mention, it's been documented that if you look at gifted education as talent development of domains, math talent, music talent, sport talent, etc., that none of it really can be fully developed in school. And that part of it involves extracurricular work. And I think part of what we need to do more is to reach out to people in the community who can extend the enrichment and development of kids. And this is what a really comprehensive gifted program should, in my view, in the talent development view, do. So you have this great teacher, advanced stuff, exposure, and then for kids who say, wow, that's really interesting, then you find people in the community or museum or university or whatever it is. Even in small towns, there's the dentist's office, there's the local school or innovative restaurant. There are a lot of different things that we could be doing more.
Now, help me. Connect the dentist's office to gifted education.
The science, no, seriously. I'm thinking about, because one of my relatives is a dentist in.
And a gifted one, no doubt.
Well, this is his wife. This is a town of tiny town in West Texas. And she has raised 3 PhDs through her little school, 3 science PhDs. She's the science teacher. So it does.
So she's married to the dentist.
She's married to the dentist, but she's the science teacher. And he mentors kids, the health profession.
I see. All right. Others in the room, including the vast host of Fordham staff who are here, who haven't asked a single question. Your turn. You're also from DC?
I am. Angela Novak. I'm the manager for advanced enriched instruction for the primary grades in Washington, D.C. public schools. And I wanted to touch base with Tricia because it sounds like what you have is kind of an example of doing it right on many levels. You have a progressive, supportive school district. You have a self-contained class of gifted students. You yourself, as the teacher, have an advanced degree in your field as well as a degree or credentials, I guess, in gifted education, which is a piece that's seriously lacking for many gifted programs, is that knowledge of gifted students and the pedagogy that goes behind teaching the gifted students. And you have the freedom to choose your own content-based curriculum, enriched curriculum, based on the interests of the students. So I guess part one is...
All right, your biography. He's doing a very good job of it. Go ahead.
And I may have forgotten some things, sorry. But part one is, do the other teachers in your school that are not based in the gifted program have that same freedom with content-based readings and that kind of thing that they can provide to the students and choose things that are at a challenging level? And then second, which I guess is the more important question, is knowing that you have all of those things, I guess, going right for you, and the typical thing that you're going to hear and pushback at conferences and that kind of thing is, well, we don't have any of that at our school. We don't have the ability to choose our own content. We don't have the ability to have a self-contained class. So knowing what you go through, what are your top tips or lessons for the teacher who comes up and says, well, I'm a 7th grade teacher and we don't have that. What do I do?
All right, doctor.
Well, to answer your first question, yes, my colleagues do have that kind of freedom. We don't, in language arts, have a textbook we have to use. We do have access to textbooks that we adopted, I think, my first or second year that I was in my district, and I've been there 21 years now. So we still have those. We don't rely on those. It's not anything formal. In terms of everyone has to use it. We also do have a vertical piece where we try very hard not to take literature that other grades plan to use. So, for example, I was using The Lottery by, I think it's Shirley Jackson, a couple of years ago, and right after I finished working with that with my students, we got an email from a high school teacher that said, please make sure no one uses that story because we're using it over here. I was like, oh, sorry. So we do try not to do that. What I would tell a 7th grade teacher who says, I don't have that flexibility, I don't have access to resources like what we do, would be start where you can. So if it's that, yeah, you have a mandated program you have to go through, what do you do with the kid who knows how to do X thing? Do you really have to take that kid through that? Like, let's say it's writing an informational research paper. Does that child have to do that? Okay. Is there some twist you can put into that would make that more challenging for that child? Now, admittedly, that's time consuming, especially if you're doing it on a kid by kid basis. But sometimes those small baby steps are a great starting point. And sometimes I think when schools see what can happen, then some of those restraints can slip away a little bit.
Okay.
I was terribly helpful there, but
Go ahead, Rena.
One thing I have to bring up as a psychologist is that more challenge for gifted children will be received in different ways. So some of them will say, oh, good, this is exciting. And some of them will say, I have to work at this, so I don't really want to do this, or I'm bored, which means I can't do it, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of, if kids are used to not having to work hard for a very long time, and then for the first time they're going to have to work hard, we have to be prepared to help them psychologically, just like, and I pardon because Checker and Jonathan heard, but just like good athletes and good musicians get coaching in dealing with setbacks and expectations and challenges, we need to coach kids that this is part of life and it's good to take challenges, and this is how you grow, and this is how you stay gifted.
Though some version of that advice is true of all kids, right? Helping them learn to deal with setbacks and successes and so
But I
forth.
think not so many kids have gone through school where they don't have to work very hard.
Yes.
And so, to face working hard, some of us, maybe it was in graduate school for the first time, and not necessarily for me, but, for many people. And if we're going to introduce a new level of expectation, then I think we have to be prepared. I don't know.
This is why some number of challenging middle schools and high schools and colleges even have these summer bridge type programs where you come and sort of get ready to deal with the additional agony that you're about to experience. I mean, because we know you haven't had to do this before, but if you're coming to our school, you better learn before you get here the ways in which it's different. No, I think it's very important advice. Others, we have time for one or possibly two more from anybody in the room. Finally, a voice from Fordham.
Hi, my name is Darzi Handelar, and I'm the National Research Director here at Fordham. But my question is, as a former high school teacher in Washington, D.C., where I taught AP Statistics, it was the first time that my school had ever offered an AP math class, at least in its 50-year memory.
Started with statistics.
And it was statistics. And how did we choose statistics? Well, it's the one that I wanted to teach.
I see.
Oh, it's better. It gets better. How did the students get enrolled in my class? I got to pick. And I said, how do I pick? It's my second year of teaching. And they said, well, pick whoever you want. So I picked the ones who I thought would pass. But I had no information other than their transcript about them. And I don't know whether it's because we didn't have any students at my school who had been identified as gifted, or
we just learned that DC doesn't identify.
Right. Well, I knew that now. But I knew every single special education student in my classes. I knew what their particular needs were, and I sat down with their IEPs. So my question is really, Jonathan was talking about, there's states that are, this is an area that's ripe for growth and experimentation. But also we learned that so much of this is at the school and the district level. So you said, in my district, we do this, or at my school, we do this. So how do you institutionalize something so that it doesn't leave with the teacher or it doesn't leave with the superintendent?
Good question.
Well, I really don't know if you can, which is why I have become a true believer the last couple of years that this is a state policy issue and it's an accountability system issue where we need to let people know what we expect in terms of growth from these students, in terms of excellence, and that if someone does leave, there's now an incentive for the district to make sure that that knowledge doesn't leave with them. Otherwise, I really... I sound like a glass half empty sort of guy now, like him. He's wearing off on me, but I just don't think you can do it otherwise. I think we've tried to do that for 50 years, and knowledge still leaves with the advocate when they move on to, quite frankly, when they move on from a lower income district to the wealthier district. That's usually the direction that our educational talent goes, right? And but those kids stay behind, and we just haven't figured out any other way to do it. So I'm not optimistic that it's possible.
Well, this is a ubiquitous problem, and at the risk of putting Caprice on the spot, the person who asked the question earlier about the idiotic Los Angeles policy about algebra is the former president of the school board in Los Angeles. She is no longer on the school board, or they wouldn't have instituted this idiotic policy that she was asking about. But we have policies leave with people, or good sense leaves with people. Occasionally it arrives with people, but probably the latter is no more frequent than the former. Any secret recipe for institutionalizing good things?
Get a protege.
Get a protege. That was your Dara. Now you're getting them here. One last question. Happy to entertain one more. Yes, ma'am, in the back row. She's getting a mic to you. Go for it.
I'm Catherine Rigler, a longtime advocate, also planning state level. And I think that one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the importance of advocacy groups, preferably educator and parent and community all together in one group rather than just the parent group, because it's too often said every parent thinks, especially in this county, every parent thinks her child's always a her, is gifted. But if the advocacy groups are strong, then I think there's some hope that as a given educator or a principal or policymaker leaves, there will be a pressure to keep on with these programs. The difficulty is that as the parents in the advocacy group and the educators move on, then the people coming up think that this is a given, and then they don't advocate as strongly until they find out suddenly it's gone. And that's where many districts are, as you said earlier, are now. It's gone, and so they need to get reorganized to be an advocate, and obviously NAGC is helping with that.
Makes sense to me. Any parting comments on this or otherwise?
Well, I have a party comment. Is that my camera right in the middle? I would like to apologize to the internet for using the phrase apocalyptically stupid. I'm already getting trolled for it. I did not mean it. I was emotionally fragile because the policy that was described was, I almost just said it again, ill-advised to a level that shocked me senseless. But a very quick closing anecdote. This whole equity versus excellence thing, it really undergirds what we've been talking about this entire time. And maybe I'm an American exceptionalist, but I just remember when I was in college, my parents gave me a late 80s Chevy Nova. I could never figure out why they were so generous until I realized that when they hit 55, it shook so violently that you couldn't drive faster than that. So it was a brilliant backhanded gift, really. But I used to be driving this thing, shaking to death at 60 miles an hour, going, how did we put people on the moon with technologies that 20 years older than this? I mean, it really is the level of technology we had in the 50s and 60s compared to even 20 years later was so vastly inferior, and yet we still accomplished amazing, amazing things that no one has duplicated. If we can do that, how on earth can we not focus on equity and excellence within our educational systems? That just doesn't seem like a huge stretch for me, but I talk to so many people where it's a fait accompli. There's no way we can do both. And I think we've talked a lot about a lot of strategies here that, if nothing else, at least lead us to be optimistic that not only is possible, that's how a lot of other countries are doing it.
Just keep in mind, this is a man who apologizes to the internet. Join me in thanking a swell panel. And a good paper for which we're grateful to Jonathan. And I believe drinks are supposed to be coming in to accompany the snacks. Is that right? Drinks are here. So please enjoy snacks and drinks, and stick around and give our panelists as much grief as you would like.
Thanks.